welcome back to our channel where we dive deep into the heart of the stories we love. As a longtime viewer and someone who has analyzed the intricate storytelling of General Hospital for decades, I find myself absolutely mesmerized by the current dark clouds gathering over Port Charles. For those of us who have been watching since the golden era of the 1980s, we know that this town is no stranger to nefarious plots and global conspiracies. We have seen the likes of Helena, Cassadine, and Mykonos threaten the very fabric of our beloved city. But what we are witnessing right now feels distinctly different and profoundly more dangerous. It is not just a madman with a weather machine anymore. It is a deeply personal, deeply entrenched institutional corruption that threatens to tear apart the families we have grown to love over the years. I look at the screen today and I see echoes of those classic storylines, yet amplified by a modern ruthlessness that leaves me genuinely on the edge of my seat. The central narrative that is currently dominating the canvas revolves around an unprecedented level of danger brought forth by the terrifying alliance between Peter and the enigmatic figure known as Z. I have always believed that a soap opera is only as compelling as its villains, and right now, General Hospital is giving us a masterclass in psychological warfare and absolute dominance. What makes this current storyline so incredibly gripping is the sheer scale of their ambition. They are not merely operating in the shadows of the docks or plotting petty revenge against a single family. They have managed to infiltrate and take control of the two most formidable organizations in this fictional universe. When I realized the writers were actually going to have Peter and Z dominate both the WSB and the remnants of Faison's sprawling criminal empire, I was completely stunned by the audacity of the narrative choice. Let us take a moment to really unpack the gravity of the WSB falling into the hands of someone like Peter. For viewers of our generation, the World Security Bureau has always represented a beacon of international justice, albeit a flawed one. We remember the days of Sean Donley, Robert Scorpio, and Frisco Jones risking their lives to uphold the honor of that badge. To see the WSB now twisted into a weapon of terror under the command of Peter and Z is a heartbreaking subversion of everything that organization stood for. I find myself asking, how did the writers allow such a revered institution to become so thoroughly corrupted? But then I realized that this is exactly the point. The writers are making a bold statement about the fragility of power and the terrifying reality of what happens when the safeguards fail. It makes the danger feel suffocating, and it raises the stakes to an absolute fever pitch. Peter's evolution into this supreme architect of chaos is a fascinating, if deeply unsettling, character study. I have always had complicated feelings about Peter. There were times when I genuinely hoped he could escape the toxic legacy of his father, Cesar Faison. But watching him now, fully embracing that dark lineage and merging it with the bureaucratic power of the WSB, I am struck by the tragic inevitability of his descent. He is no longer just a man running from his past. He has weaponized his past. By taking over Faison's organization alongside Z, Peter has essentially resurrected his father's ghost, but he has made it smarter, colder, and infinitely more resourceful. As a critic, I have to applaud the sheer narrative symmetry of Peter becoming the very monster he once claimed to despise, even as the fan in me weeps for the destruction he is causing to the people of Port Charles. Then we have Z, a character whose very presence adds a layer of unpredictable menace to the canvas. While Peter brings the emotional baggage and the historical ties to the town, Z operates as this chillingly efficient counterweight. Together, they have created a syndicate that feels entirely unbeatable. I often wonder how the writers plan to dismantle this behemoth they have created, because right now, the grip Peter and Z have on the global underworld and the international intelligence community seems absolute. The paranoia in Port Charles is palpable. Every shadow feels like a threat. Every stranger could be a sleeper agent, and that atmosphere of constant dread is something General Hospital has not achieved quite so effectively since the height of the Cold War spy storylines. It is a brilliant way to keep the audience guessing and to keep the tension at an all-time high. But just as the darkness seems impenetrable, the narrative masterfully reintroduces the light. And this brings me to the thrilling return of Jason, Anna, and the unexpected wildcard, Hudson. For a longtime fan, there is nothing quite as exhilarating as watching the old guard assemble to face down an impossible threat. When the news broke that these three would be forming the core resistance against Peter and Z, I felt a genuine rush of adrenaline. This is what we tune in for, isn't it? The grand clash of titans. Anna Devane and Jason Morgan represent two entirely different spectrums of heroism in Port Charles, and forcing them to align their distinct methodologies alongside a mysterious new force is a brilliant stroke of storytelling that reinvigorates the entire show. Let us delve deeply into Anna's position in this escalating war. My heart aches for Anna, as I am sure yours does. She is a woman who has dedicated her entire life to the WSB, only to see it hijacked by the very man whose existence has caused her so much anguish. The psychological toll this must be taking on her is immense, and the portrayal of this internal conflict is delivered with such devastating nuance. Anna is not just fighting a global terror syndicate. She is fighting her own legacy, her own profound regrets, and the very agency she helped build. I find her storyline to be the emotional anchor of this entire saga. Every time she makes a tactical decision against Peter, you can see the ghosts of her past haunting her every move. It is a brilliant, tragic dilemma that elevates the soap opera genre to a level of high emotional art that resonates deeply with older viewers who understand the complexities of family and duty. And then there is Jason. Jason's return to Port Charles always shifts the tectonic plates of the town's power dynamics. But this time, his presence feels absolutely vital for the survival of the community. Jason is the ultimate pragmatist, the stoic enforcer who does not let emotion cloud his judgment. While Anna is tied up in the emotional knots of her institutional loyalty and maternal guilt, Jason sees only the threat that needs to be eliminated. I have always appreciated how Jason serves as the grounding force in these larger-than-life storylines. He brings the global spy drama back down to the gritty reality of the streets. His involvement signals to the audience that the time for negotiation is over, the time for action has arrived. The friction and eventual respect between Jason's underworld tactics and Anna's espionage background provide a fascinating character dynamic that I simply cannot get enough of. However, the element that truly disrupts the board and introduces a completely new paradigm is the arrival of Hudson. Hudson is the catalyst that neither Peter nor Z could have fully anticipated, and frankly, neither did I. I am absolutely captivated by how the writers have positioned Hudson as the ultimate counterforce in this narrative. While Jason brings the muscle and Anna brings the intelligence, Hudson brings an unpredictable, explosive energy that throws all the established rules out the window. Who exactly is Hudson in the grand scheme of this war? To me, Hudson represents the untamed variable, the ghost from the past, or perhaps the dark horse of the future, whose motivations are just murky enough to keep us all guessing. The integration of Hudson into the Jason and Anna alliance creates a formidable triad that finally gives Port Charles a fighting chance against an otherwise insurmountable enemy. The introduction of this triad has caused a massive shift in the momentum of the storyline. For months, we have watched Peter and Z operate with absolute impunity, treating the citizens of Port Charles like pawns on a chessboard. But the return of Jason, Anna, and Hudson has violently disrupted their game. I love watching the subtle cracks begin to form in Peter's arrogant facade. The moment he realized that he was no longer dealing with frightened civilians, but with seasoned warriors who know his every move, the entire tone of the show shifted. The writers are brilliantly executing a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, but the roles are constantly reversing. One day, Peter and Z have the upper hand, and the next, a calculated strike by Hudson or Jason sends the villains reeling, proving that the old guard still possesses the cunning to outsmart the new regime. This escalating war is not without its severe consequences, and this is where my perspective as a critic forces me to look at the darker implications of the narrative. The clashes between these two opposing forces are generating shockwaves that are tearing through the community. We are witnessing an unprecedented level of collateral damage, and the tension is resulting in new, deeply impactful tragedies. The show is not shying away from the brutal reality of this conflict. The recent shocks and the looming threat of new deaths hang over every scene like a suffocating shroud. As viewers who have invested years, sometimes decades, into these characters, the prospect of losing beloved figures to this war is genuinely terrifying. Yet it is this very fear that keeps us emotionally tethered to the screen. I often find myself debating the necessity of these major character deaths in soap operas. Are they strictly for shock value, or do they serve a deeper narrative purpose? In the context of this war against Peter and Z, I have to argue that the casualties are absolutely necessary to validate the threat. If Peter and Z are truly in command of the WSB and Faison's empire, they cannot be defeated without a significant, heartbreaking cost. The writers are making a bold, painful choice to sacrifice certain characters to elevate the stakes. And while it hurts as a fan, as a critic, I recognize the structural necessity of these tragedies. It forces the heroes into a corner, stripping away their plot armor and making their eventual triumph feel earned rather than conveniently handed to them by the writers. The psychological toll on the rest of Port Charles cannot be overstated. We see the legacy families forced to navigate a world where the traditional rules of engagement no longer apply. I am fascinated by how this overarching war is bleeding into the everyday lives of the characters. Even a simple conversation at the hospital or the local diner is laced with underlying tension. The brilliant thing about a storyline of this magnitude is that it acts as a crucible, testing the bonds of every relationship on the canvas. Friendships are being strained, marriages are being tested, and unlikely alliances are being forged in the fires of this conflict. It is a testament to the rich, interconnected history of General Hospital that a plot involving global espionage can have such profound, intimate ripples across the entire town, reminding us that at its core, this show is about family and community resilience. As we move closer to what must inevitably be an explosive climax, I find myself analyzing every minor detail, every lingering glance between the characters, searching for clues about how this will all end. Will Anna be forced to pull the trigger on Peter, bringing her tragic arc to a devastating, full-circle conclusion? Will Jason have to sacrifice his own freedom, or worse, to dismantle Z's operation? And what role will Hudson ultimately play when the dust settles? Will Hudson emerge as the savior of Port Charles, or a new threat entirely? These are the questions that keep me awake at night, and they are the reason why, after all these years, I remain so deeply devoted to this show. The storytelling is complex, the emotional stakes are sky high, and the performances are nothing short of stellar, proving that General Hospital still knows how to craft a masterpiece of daytime television.